Hey guys, welcome to another video. Mindspeed here, and in today's video I just wanted to talk about the topic of ego. We all have an ego, no matter how humble you try to play, no matter how modest you try to be, we all have an ego. And the ego is a false sense of self that's very fragile that most people choose to align with, but it's not necessarily who they are. It is who your brain makes up for them to be, to limit them from actually stepping outside of the comfort zone, because your brain is automatically wired to keep you away from danger. That's why we have fight or flight instincts and things like that. When you resonate from the ego, you already have this made up belief in your head of who you think you are, without having a proper self-knowledge. So it's more like a facade of what we think we are. That's why some people like to associate themselves with their ego based off what they did, based off their experiences, based off their status. Resonating from the ego is from the perspective of, let's say somebody's a celebrity and they know they're a celebrity. They know a lot of people want to see them. They know a lot of people like to pay them attention. So they let that attention get to their heads and they start forming their self-concept or self-image around the attention they're getting from other people, and not necessarily what they have going on inside. That's why they keep craving that validation. They keep craving that attention every time, because that's the only way the ego can feel safe. Because the moment it drops a little bit, they don't get the right amount of attention, they start feeling some type of way. So just things like that, that's a very, very fragile way to exist, because you don't have a solid sense of self. You don't have a solid sense of who you really are. You just resonate with the validation you get from everybody else and not necessarily the one you give yourself. But then the only thing we could do to have a strong sense of self is to have a very strong self-image. And I always talk about it in my previous videos. Having a strong self-image is about knowing who you really are. It's about knowing your strengths. It's about knowing your weaknesses. It's about knowing ways you can develop yourselves in different ways. That's the only way you can resonate with your truth, because when you're operating from a sense of self, you know what you can do, you know who you are, you know your traits, you know your strengths and all that. You're not resonating from like outer world validation, because you don't care about the validation. You don't care about the likes, you don't care about the support. As long as you know you have yourself, that's the only thing that validates you. That's what separates the ego from the sense of self, from the self-image. People who resonate from the ego can get pissed off easily, because little things might make them feel like they're not perfect. So they gotta, and the ego is a fragile sense of self that thinks it's perfect. So anything that falls short of that, it never wants to resonate with that. That's why some people have a hard time taking accountability, because they know in their minds they're perfect, they're high and mighty. But then apologizing means actually acknowledging somebody else and taking accountability for your actions. They feel it's beneath them because of the self-propped up ego they've had. So once people can understand that most people operate from the ego based on their positions in life, like the CEO is definitely not gonna, the CEO is definitely gonna think is better than the janitor. The manager is definitely gonna think it's better than the subordinate, because they're resonating from their positions, they're resonating from the title they gave themselves, not necessarily who they really are. A very selfless CEO knows he is only a CEO because of his title. It is not necessarily who he is. He's only doing that for that job title. And the janitor that works in the building is also a human being. So they resonate from that frequency of being a human being. But when they operate from the ego, that's where they feel like, oh, they can do this and that, because they're way ahead of the hierarchy over a janitor. So that's two distinct state of thoughts that most people don't really realize, because you have to go through an awakening to actually drop the ego. You go through a process called ego death, where you just strip yourself from every belief you've ever had of yourself. You strip everything off and you go down to the authentic self. That's where you can resonate from your truth. You know who you really are. You know your strengths. You know everything about yourself. You know your values. You know your morals. You know all that. And people that operate from the ego, they don't necessarily have those things in place because they're doing things to get the validation of other people. So necessarily half the time, they're gonna do things to get validation from other people. That's why some people would rather do good and post it because they need that validation. But the selfless people who do good and know they're doing it from their hearts because we're all human beings. So that's one of the key differences I just wanted to just discuss because it's something I just thought about. And I just wanted to just put it out there as well. You know, I appreciate everybody that's always been supporting me still, bro. You know, I'm still trying to put videos out more consistently, bro. You know, it's a lot of things I like to do every day. Look, check that shit in the back, bro. I got a new addition to the painting wall, bro. You know, I made that yesterday, so I'll be making content, putting out artworks, you know, doing everything I need to do. I'm trying to be consistent with everything, bro. So appreciate y'all supporting me. If you just join me in this mind spill, I like to talk about different topics like that. You know, I could be diverse sometimes, but mostly I like to talk about personal development and self-growth. So yeah, welcome. Yeah.